Today's conversation focuses on one of the most important snapshots we have of Ontario's ICI construction industry, the 2026 Contractor Outlook Survey. Each year, this survey gives us a real-time look at what contractors are experiencing on the ground, what's driving confidence, where the risks are emerging, and how the industry is responding to ongoing economic and policy pressures. This year's results paint an interesting picture. On one hand, contractors are busy, many operating at or near full capacity. On the other, there's a clear sense of caution about what lies ahead. We're seeing concerns around project delays, uncertainty by project owners, and more broadly in the market, and that's even with a significant pipeline of work across the province. At the same time, there are some encouraging signals. Improvements in supply chains, continued investment in apprenticeships, and ongoing discussions about how procurement workforce strategies can better support long-term outcomes.
Welcome to OCS Talks, your source for all things related to Ontario's unionized ICI construction sector.
So what does all this mean for the construction industry in Ontario, and how should we respond? To help us unpack the findings and what they signal for the year ahead, I'm joined by Katherine Jacobs, our very own Director of Research here at the OCS, and I'm Brian Barron, CEO of the Ontario Construction Secretariat. Welcome to OCS Talks. Katherine, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, no problem. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So, Katherine, for those who may not be familiar, can you briefly explain what the Contractor Outlook Survey is and why that matters to the industry?
Sure. So the annual contractor survey that we complete at the OCS is a survey where we go out to the contractor community, and that's the entire contractor community. So we talk to contractors, whether they're a general contractor, a trade contractor, union or non-union signatory, in all regions of the province. We have a sample of 400 contractors that we speak to each year, a different sample, but every year it's a representative sample. And we ask them a variety of questions. We are looking for that sort of 1 year outlook from them. What are their concerns? What are their challenges? Where do they see the market going? Where do they see their work going in specific? And it's really an important touch point that we have with that contractor community. Otherwise, we're left looking at secondary data sources, which are certainly interesting, but it's really nice to get that on the ground feel from contractors to sort of compare what we're seeing in the data as opposed to what they're feeling in reality. And this year, I think it was even more important than ever to have that litmus test, because in uncertainty or in times of transition, the data is not as current as you would like it to be. So when you look at data, you're looking at what sort of happened in the last quarter or the last year, and the contractors really give us that opportunity for that current, this is what's happening now, and this is where we see things going in the next few months. So it's a really important time to be speaking to them, especially given all the uncertainty that we've been experiencing.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a bit of a wild ride since I came onto the OCS with Trump coming in and everything else, and certainly you could feel that in the room. I would argue that this survey also sort of almost anchors our State of the Industry and Outlook conference as well, which kind of gives that contractor perspective, which is a really interesting component to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I probably should have mentioned that it is a vital component of our annual survey or our annual conference that we hold each year in March.
Absolutely. So what makes the 2026 survey particularly important given the economic and political environment that we have?
Well, contractors are experiencing the same uncertainty and concerns that we're experiencing. So they're in transition. They need to better understand what's going on. And I think it's important to have that benchmark. Even if you're a contractor, you can look to this survey and say, good to hear that other contractors are feeling the same things I'm feeling. It's not just me. This is where the industry is going. So I think given where we are right now, it's that important touch point that we really want people to turn to and to share information with us so that they have that knowledge and they can continue to plan their year ahead and the subsequent years as well.
I think that, that concept of sort of comfort in what other people are thinking with this kind of thing is really important, especially this year. I mean, you take a look at the markets and that sort of stuff, and it is hard to get your bearings as to kind of where we're at and where we should be and that kind of stuff. It's a constant up and down. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So along with that, so like one of the themes that really came out is, contractors are obviously still busy. but they're very cautious right now. So what do you think is driving that contradiction? Because that's not normally what we would see in this situation.
Yeah, that was a bit of a struggle when we first got the results back to try to make sense of that. And the best that I can do is we ask a couple of questions. So one, we ask contractors whether they thought the overall construction market in Ontario was growing, stable, or declining. And then we also ask them questions about their own business. So their outlook for their next year. Do you expect to do more work next year or less work than you did the previous year? So they're two distinct questions that we're asking. And so that dichotomy in terms of the response of people saying, yeah, my business looks pretty good, but that overall construction market, I'm not so sure about that one. So I think what was driving that primarily was partially the way we asked the question. And also, I think the change in that residential market segment, and certainly the high-rise residential market, that market has certainly taken a substantial downturn, shall we say, and it gets a lot of noise. It makes a lot of noise. It's in the radio. It's in the news. It gets a lot of attention. And so I think people are hearing that and saying, oh, construction's in the dumps, and they just apply it to everything. And that's not the case. So I think overall that residential sector was kind of making contractors think, yeah, overall, I don't think the Ontario construction market is all that great. Happy for me. I'm okay in this my little ICI sector, but overall, the market's not doing so well. And secondly, it's that uncertainty that we've talked about. You can't help but wake up every morning and have another major announcement or change in the geopolitical world that doesn't make you feel anxious. And so I think that makes people generally feel less positive about the overall outlook. But when a contractor sits there and he looks at his order book and he looks at the projects that they have lined up for the following year or for the next year, they're like, oh, well, yeah, I'm okay, but everyone else is not okay. So I think that it's kind of the two things in combination.
For sure. And I think, I'm glad you picked up on the anxiety side of things, because that certainly does drive the uncertainty side. But then we've also got this interdependence too between sort of residential and ICI. We're seeing far more jobs now where there's a crossover between the two. So I think it's probably fair that a lot of people also kind of see that residential slowdown is potentially impacting them somewhere along the way, because they are interlinked at some level, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And that does come up in some of the other questions we asked as well.
Absolutely. So now the survey shows about 2/3 of the contractors are operating at or above capacity. What does that tell us about the current demand?
I guess I'm not sure what it tells us about the current demand. If they were operating at that capacity in 25 and they expect to continue operating at that same level of capacity in 2026. So that tells me they expect to do the same amount of work. And it's important that contractors be operating at that above 75% operating capacity, because you have workers, you have materials, you have equipment, and that's all a cost. And you want those materials and people being out to work and working for you. So I think that's a standard level that they should be operating at. Certainly if they're operating beyond 100% capacity, that's not sustainable for long term, but that's sort of a sweet spot for them, I would say. And it tells me that they've got work for this year. The question doesn't delve into beyond this year, 2026, but it tells me that they have sufficient work to keep them operating for the balance of the year. Certainly there were firms, a smaller proportion, who do not. And so those contractors are a little more hungry and so seeking out new opportunities to be able to up their operating capacity.
Yeah, I know when I was in the industry, so on the construction side, so before my government life, on the actual construction side, that was always a major concern for us, was keeping crews going, because it's not as simple as just shutting a project down, laying people off, and then bringing them back when you're ready to start up again. It's a heck of an enterprise to try and put all that together. So that probably adds to some of that uncertainty as well. But it's certainly positive that we're seeing people that are running at least at or above capacity going forward. So I guess in the end of it, so our contractors sort of essentially saying we're busy now, but we're worried about what's next. kind of thing? Is that what's fueling some of this?
I think a little bit, but I actually kind of think that's just the nature of the beast in the contracting community. I'm not a contractor myself, but my father was, and I think you're always just searching for that next project. It's often on the union, the labor side, they say they're working themselves out of a job. Well, so is a contractor. So they're always sort of looking for those next projects, and any degree of uncertainty in the marketplace causes them a little grief. They're like, oh, well, if, tariffs come in and I was going to do work in this area, but I'm not sure whether that manufacturing plant's still going to be producing and exporting, maybe I won't be getting that work. And how do I seek new opportunities? So I think that is sort of the nature of the contracting community. But for now, I think they seem to be telling us that for 2026, things were pretty stable and looking positive, but certainly cautious about what might come in the years to come.
So how much of this uncertainty you think is tied to macroeconomic factors versus industry specific issues?
Yeah, that's a tough one to say. So we do try to unpack in the survey the question, do you expect to do more or less work? And by asking them why, like if you expect to do more, why do you expect to do more work? So those people who said they expected more work were more likely to talk about the fact that they had contracts already signed, projects ready to go for the year. They had that pipeline of work that they had stabilized and confirmed for the year to come. Their marketing efforts they spent on maintaining relationships with current clients. So they tended to focus on things that they had control over on. Whereas those people who said they were expecting less work, they were more likely to suggest, well, it's economic conditions, it's market, there's not enough projects out there for me to even bid or to get work on. So they were looking at more market conditions. So it was a bit of a mix, actually, in terms of, why they expected to grow or not grow. So I can't say definitively it's just market conditions. Certainly there are projects out there. It just depends on the type of work that specific contractors are doing. And there is some variation depending on the size of a contractor that you were. Larger contractors, sort of mid to larger contractors, are more, they can do different types of work. And a lot of the work right now that's out there is the bigger work, a lot of that government sponsored work or infrastructure work. And that work tends to go to some of those larger contractors. So they were a little more confident than some of those smaller contractors for sure.
I think that's one of the interesting things about the survey, because we reach out to both GCs and trade contractors and then all sizes, right? To really sort of get a sense as to kind of where everybody's at. Now, so when we look at, the survey and looking at sort of project delays, cancellations, that sort of stuff. So over half of the contractors reported project delays or cancellations. How significant is that for the industry overall?
I think it's really significant, and it's up from what we've experienced in the past. So we asked the question modestly differently this year, so I can't compare project delays versus cancellations because we just lumped them all together this year. But I think it's a significant challenge. So and we sort of tested this with BuildForce, who talks to a lot of owners about major projects. We'll talk about the pipeline of projects later, but they touch base with a lot of a lot of owners who are planning those projects. And they were also experiencing or hearing about the same thing. Virtually all of those major projects are experiencing not necessarily outright cancellations, but certainly changing of schedule. So if a project has started, the timeline of it may be stretched out to completion. For those that aren't started, might have started in the third quarter of this year. Well, maybe it's not going to get started until the first quarter of next year type thing. So certainly there's a lot of that going on. And it creates uncertainty. Like, all comes back. I think that's the primary word I would say coming out of this survey is uncertainty. It creates uncertainty for a contractor. A contractor planned to have people at a job site for a certain period of time, and schedule changed. Now it's been pushed out, and that has a trickle-on effect. So maybe that contractor had other work during that time when that project's going to get up and started. So it just creates a lot of chaos in the industry, I would say, and a lot of planning and replanning to try to rejig all this work. So that's, I would say, is the biggest impact that the changing of schedules has for the industry.
Yeah, and that was even reflected in the podcast I did with Gord Rados from the Ontario Structural Steel Fabricators Association, where he had talked about basically there's a lot of project owners out there who, for a number of different reasons, but one of the big ones is what's happening, kind of south of the border here, but where they're holding off, playing a bit of the waiting game, saying, hey, listen, before we put big investment in anywhere, we want to understand a little bit more as to what's going to happen long term. And that's a huge question mark right now. Like, I just don't think that's, none of us have this crystal ball that we can kind of see that. So, and with that was kind of that material cost. So, which is reflected in the survey, the top drivers for some of this was material costs, financing constraints. They talked a little bit about high interest rates, which the interest rate thing was a little bit confusing to me because we sit right at around, the Bank of Canada is at 2.25% right now, which is a pretty reasonable rate. So what stands out most to you from really kind of those top drivers around the uncertainty side of things?
I think in terms of the high interest rates, because we are speaking to contractors who also work in that high-rise residential market, I think that's primarily coming from them. So certainly I have heard from, when you read a lot about the high-rise residential sector and what's going on in that market, they still will say interest rates aren't low enough to kickstart them back into work, to start building again. So they're not low enough from a purchaser, a buyer of the home perspective. They want those ultra low rates that were around a bunch of years ago. And that's all contributed to the high cost of housing, right? So if the housing cost wasn't as great, then they wouldn't need as low interest rates. But to be able to purchase at that high rate, high cost of an apartment or a condo, they need lower interest rates. And the contractor also is looking for those lower financing rates to be able to build it. So I think that's where the interest rate situation is coming from. And maybe a little hangover of people still thinking interest rates are high, but they're not as high as they certainly were in the last few years. I think material costs is still a challenge. So while inflation is getting under control, we're sort of back into that 2 to 3% for, the consumer price index inflation. But construction materials, some of those products are experiencing greater inflation than what we are at, from a consumer perspective. So they are experiencing, 4 to 5% inflation on some construction products. So that's a bit of a challenge for the industry. So especially if people have bid on work at a certain price and the price gets inflated, that's challenging for the contractor. It's challenging for the owner if they are anticipating a certain project and suddenly the material costs to build that project have escalated and now the project's too expensive for them to proceed. So that's creating a lot of challenges, and that's why we're hearing some of the reasons as to why those projects are changing. And again, coming back to tariffs and trade with our partner to the south, if contractors, especially in that industrial sector, are not able to export their product, and given they don't really know where that's going, then that creates that uncertainty. And then some of those projects are just being on that industrial side. We are seeing a fairly strong pullback on the industrial sector projects, not proceeding or putting it on hold until such a time when there's more awareness and certainty going around about those projects.
Yeah, for sure. And we still don't even have sort of a great sense as to what is coming up next, because we've got to renegotiate Kuzma and that kind of stuff too. And I think it is important to note with this podcast that this survey predated some of the recent government announcements around GST relief on certain residential projects and that sort of stuff. Although it's not like flicking a light switch, you can do that sort of thing, but there still is this ripple effect that has to kind of happen before you start to see an industry moving as well. Now, some of what we've talked about is, this $200 or $200 billion project pipeline in Ontario. So that sounds incredibly strong. So why does the sentiment still feel so cautious?
Well, the $200 billion is spread across the entire province. So it's in every region of the province. Primarily, a lot of it is in the GTA and central Ontario, but there are projects across the province. They tend to be larger projects, so the big infrastructure projects, transit projects, and not every contractor works on those projects. Not every contractor is capable of working on those projects. So, if you're a smaller contractor, you might be sitting there going, well, that's great for them, but I'm not working on any of those projects. Where's my work? So I think that's where we're getting when we're out talking to 400 different contractors. We have a spectrum of contractors, so they're not all working on those specific projects. And then just as we've talked about, the timing of those projects. So when are they taking place? Contractors are probably a little more circumspect about when those projects will actually get up and running. And even though that 200 billion, I think the next question, maybe we're delving a little bit about the certainty of those projects. Those projects are supposed to be a hard yes. Financing's in place, the planning's in place. They are scheduled to start. They're not maybes, they're not pie in the sky. These are actually projects that are proceeding. So, but from a contractor perspective, they don't know the timing. And if the scheduling's changing, it's like the project might as well just not even be there because they're not actually able to start working on it. So.
Yeah, well, and I think we heard that from Angela Clayton as well at IO, where there is a commitment to keeping that moving. The government does seem to understand that even though residential may be in a bit of a slump right now, that infrastructure need is there and that sort of stuff. So I think it's probably still that uncertainty thing that's getting to the confidence of the actual contractors to some degree as well. So with that, which sectors do you think are really driving that pipeline? Like when we look at ICI, that's pretty broad. We've got a lot going on. So where's that strength coming from?
Yeah, that ICI sector, when you look at that pipeline, the biggest category for sure is transit projects. Those are big projects. They're expensive projects. They last a long time, sometimes too long. And they're primarily taking place in sort of the GTA, Central Ontario, Eastern Ontario, and that is by far the biggest component of it. But you also have a lot of power infrastructure projects, so work at the Bruce, work at OPG, whether it's Darlington or Pickering, there's work there. Some work's just finishing up, but there's plans for work to start almost back end that work that's finishing up. So those are sort of the top two big areas where work is taking place. And then if you look at hospitals, virtually every region I would say all regions of the province have a major hospital either currently under construction or planned to be under construction in the next few years. And then there's the industrial sector. Up north in particular, you have number of mining projects that are underway and planned to be underway. And those are being supported and getting some extra push from the Major Projects Office. So that office that was created by the federal government to identify those important projects, important nation building projects that need to be built. So some of those projects have gotten tagged for that. And in the industrial sector, we are seeing, as I've mentioned, some weaknesses there. So you are seeing some of those projects actually being postponed or I don't know if they've been outright canceled, but certainly postponed for a period of time until there's greater certainty for them to move forward.
And that's where we're really seeing the impact of the tariffs. It's that true uncertainty around sort of that manufacturing side of things.
Yeah.
Where is that material going? Where is it coming from? Kind of thing. Yeah. Now let's jump over. I want to talk a little bit about labor shortages. So they still remain a concern, though less than previous years. So what do you think's changed there?
Well, there's a few things. The residential sector, the weakness in the residential sector has eased the labor market there. So there were a lot of people who might have been working in that market who are currently not working. And while it's not a one-to-one transfer over to working in the ICI sector, it has ease the pressure on the overall system. So I see that's happening. And I think just some of the rescheduling of projects. So pushing things out. You don't have as many things stacking up as they once were. And I think Angela also talked about that, trying to plan projects so that we're not building two major hospitals in Northern Ontario at the same time, or to be a little more thoughtful in the way we're procuring the work from a government perspective so that we have that opportunity to spread some of the workers around a little bit.
Yeah, and I think what we're definitely seeing that from the building trade side of things. They're trying to take a
Mhm.
far more thoughtful approach as to
Yeah.
when they're bringing workers on, because there's also the other consideration too, where it's the apprenticeship completion side of it. I mean, you don't want to flood the market with workers and then not have enough work to keep them going through to their apprenticeship and that sort of stuff. So I guess with that, in the survey, there was about half of the contractors were still expecting to have some difficulty in hiring skilled labor. So what do you think is behind that?
There's a couple things. There is still a challenge with the aging baby boomers, and they are still leaving the industry, and so that's a reality. So contractors who may have workers who are in their late 50s or into their 60s now, they're probably looking at them saying, they're going to be leaving pretty soon, if not immediately. And it's not a one-to-one, slot in. You don't get a brand new person who's going to replace that person who's been with you for 20,
There's
30
been a
years,
ramp up
right?
there to get them to where they got to be. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think contractors are aware of that. And it's important the way we ask the question. We're asking about experience, skilled labor. Contractors can always find somebody to fill in at a tight spot or to come in and meet a need. But to get that experienced, skilled labor is really the challenge. So I think they do still see that as challenging and finding the people that they want. So while certainly the unions and their contractor partners are doing a lot to bring in those apprentices and to get them skilled up and into the workforce, contractors are still looking for that sort of perfect person who can just walk in and be super productive. And that's not always the case. That's not what they're going to get every time.
No, and I think it's funny. We've been talking about this a fair bit about sort of the recruitment side of things, and there's been sort of this long-term problem of trying to get people attracted to the trades. A lot of that is sort of some legacy messaging that at least I grew up with, where it was kind of go down the university path, go down sort of that white collar kind of path, and now we're shifting gears a little bit, trying to get people into the trades. But I think one of the bigger issues at this point is that retention thing, right? Like it's I think there's been some success that's been made, and obviously I want to hear kind of what your thoughts are on this one. But my personal feeling is we have made some inroads to this in getting people here, but are they the right people? Can they put up, are they well suited to the job? So what are your thoughts on that?
I would agree 100%. And especially because we're trying to broaden, and rightfully so, who we attract to the industry. So we're, trying to bring in more women, more diverse workers, youth at risk. So you're bringing in a broad spectrum of people to the industry. And, it takes a lot to bring someone in and to help grow them. And it's not going to be perfect for everyone. Not everyone is going to be suited. Not everyone's going to have the aptitudes, and not everyone's going to like it. So I think we need to continue to do that work at the front end to those pre-apprenticeship programs that are out there. Those are kind of important to assess people, so you don't get someone in and started into their actual apprenticeship program and get through year one and then just like, oh my God, what was I thinking? What am I doing here on this job site type thing? You want those people who go in to get into that year one and actually know that this is absolutely what I want to do, and I have an aptitude for it, and I can have success doing this. No one wants to get into something that don't feel they can be successful in. So I think there's still work to be done there. And especially because we've broadened who's coming into the industry, there's probably even more work to be done.
For sure. It's, you look at sort of that investment, the return on investment for any contractor bringing somebody in there, like that, the mentorship, the apprenticeship, that side of thing, that's very costly. So it's making sure that you've got the right person who truly enjoys the work. That's really what's going to keep them. So
yeah, and the supports for them. You just said the word mentorship. The supports for them while they're going through their apprenticeship, while they're working, someone they can turn to and ask questions to, someone that they can be supported by and know how to get through that system, because it's challenging.
Yeah, and I think their success directly hinges upon sort of that integration into the workforce and how that happens. Because it is one of those jobs where, you do have to, you kind of walk the walk sort of thing for quite a long period of time to actually get into it, to really get the true feeling. So the survey indirectly reinforces the value of workforce stability and the training systems that are out there. So do you see a stronger case emerging for the union advantage, in this environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to see that kit to being able to make that case for the union advantage. There's a lot of positive reasons why owners should be looking to that union, to the either unionized contractor or unionized labor to build their projects. It's about certainty. It's about stability. And, we've talked about so much uncertainty. So if there's anything that can be controlled, then maybe let's find that, that one silver lining. It's like, okay, I can't control all of that stuff over there, but I can control this. So if, obviously I'm very supportive of Ontario's unionized sector, but there's a lot of positive selling features, whether it's the safety, whether it's training, whether it's productivity, the support that the unions give, the fact that they're partners, that they can work on these projects together to problem solve things together. I think there's a lot of opportunity right now to be supporting that union advantage and promoting that to buyers of construction services, so that they know that there is this glimmer of hope of certainty in their world that they can move forward with.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the big pushes for us here at the OCS is obviously, we've done the health and safety studies, which are, obviously very favorable for us from the union side of things. And I should probably do a whole other podcast just on that alone, because there's lots to talk about that way. But then even looking at that investment in training, there's over 100 training centers out there, union training centers, that provide high quality training that actually produce highly skilled workers out there who are actually able to, who are able to deliver that work. And, one of the questions that we looked at in the survey looked at the procurement side of things, as well as tying in the highly competitive nature of the environment that we're in. And I'm just kind of curious here as to what your thoughts are on how we communicate that value, that union value, more proactively.
Well, I guess just to step back in terms of what we heard in the survey, the competitive nature, we always knew construction is a competitive industry, but contractors are seeing increasing competition and expect more competition in 2026 than they experienced in 2025. So that tells you something about market conditions. People are hungrier, more people are bidding work. More people are wanting these projects. And we even heard some commentary in the survey that people from the residential sector, who traditionally have only ever worked in that residential sector, are starting to bid work in the ICI sector and not really having the experience or knowledge. And so, if you're hungry enough, there's, do you underbid projects just to be able to get the work? But it doesn't speak anything to the quality of work or the quality of the project that will proceed. So are those contractors who may get a low bid, are they actually going to be able to properly build whatever is being constructed? So that's certainly a big challenge for the industry right now. And we're hearing a little bit more about it. So when we asked the question about pre-qualification, we wanted to get a sense from contractors, how supportive are they of that pre-qualification sort of method of procuring work? And a good number of them said, I think it was about 60% said that yes, they have to they generally are pre-qualifying for projects that they bid on. But when we asked them if they thought it enhanced the quality of work or sort of leveled that playing field, about 85% said absolutely it does. So I think that's a message that we can, at the OCS, can be conveying to those buyers of construction services, whether it's municipalities, private sector buyers, or other levels of government or agencies, sort of convey that information to them about the importance of pre-qualification. Yes, some of them do it already, but not everybody is. And so that certainty of understanding that the people that you have on your list are capable of doing this job, and you're not going to be paying, at the other end of the project for change orders and revisions and changes that might be necessary as a result of hiring someone who wasn't really capable of doing the job the first time.
Well, I think it's, we've certainly looked at some numbers recently, and the numbers for publicly tendered projects, you've got 90% of them going to the low bid, and the average is 15%, lower than sort of the median bid that comes in, which to me is, that paints a really ugly picture, because really what you've got is a bit of that race to the bottom where people are suddenly having to compete, bringing on potentially unqualified workers to perform the work, bringing in inferior materials, practices, that sort of stuff. So we do have a lot of work there to try and change that mentality around how these jobs are awarded, to make sure that you're actually getting contractors who are capable of performing the work and delivering something that's of actual value, not just delivering something for the sake of it. If you and I are sitting here again next year, if I haven't made this process too painful for you, what would need to change for the outlook to feel more optimistic next year?
Well, I'm not sure I'm optimistic about next year, but there's a few things that need to change, maybe a couple of years. Yeah. I would like to see our government continue to step up and support the public infrastructure that is necessary. We need that work done anyway. And so it's important to be doing it now. If the private sector, doesn't quite have that value proposition to move forward on projects right now, then it's great to have the public sector step in and do that. And that will further enhance our competitiveness as a province and a country going forward if we invest in our infrastructure now. So that's one thing I want to continue to see. Ideally, we'll have renegotiated the Canada-US-Mexico agreement and have some certainty. Favorably, yes, and have some certainty in terms of trade prospects going forward, and we will remove all of that issue that we're currently experiencing as to not really sure that we want to invest in our manufacturing facilities because we don't know where we're going to be exporting our products to. And finally, I think I've seen some positive things from a national perspective as Canada stepping up and taking, responsibility for ourselves to ensure that we are able to function as a cohesive country. And, maybe we have relied a little bit too much on our neighbor to the south, but I would like to see us continuing to move in that direction, have that open up some of our provincial borders, which I know we're working on, and have that to enhance the effectiveness of our country as a whole. So those are kind of the things I would be looking for. And I think it's going to take a few years. I don't think we're going to be through this just next year, but I think, that's long term. I think that's where we need to be going.
Yeah. And I think it saddens me to kind of say, hey, we got to start looking, elsewhere and not necessarily cutting the US out of things, but trying to really strengthen our own country, but look to other places in the world. But I would say that the one really positive thing for me anyway is just seeing sort of that sense of unity, the trying to work with other provinces and try to make it work within our country. And I think the right steps are being made that way, which is a positive thing for me. It gives me a little bit of encouragement, but do understand that again, this isn't a light switch that you suddenly turn all that on. There's some challenges ahead of us that we're going to have to overcome, but certainly, the pressure is on now. So if it's going to happen, it's going to happen soon-ish sort of thing. So yeah.
For sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. So I brought Katherine on today to help us expand our discussion from the State of the Industry and Outlook Conference, where we examine both the economic state of the ICI sector, but it's really kind of looking at it from two perspectives. It's the contractor perspective and then also the financial perspective. So we really kind of balance the two of them during that conference. If you haven't attended in the past, I can tell you that it is very worthwhile. It's always the first week of March, and more details can be found on our website. With that, I'd like to thank Katherine for her time today on OCS Talks. For more information on today's podcast and resources like the full Contractor Outlook Survey from the Ontario Construction Secretariat, visit our website at iciconstruction.com and follow us on social media.
Ontario Construction Secretariat. Knowledge to build on. Visit iciconstruction.com to learn more.